I was listening to Radio Caroline. There was somebody broadcasting. Mr. Ben, they said, you're a young man with young children. Why do you want to stop the pirates? And the phone rang just over there, and it was the Prime Minister. He'd been listening to Radio Caroline. He said, have you heard that broadcast? So I said, yes, I have, Prime Minister, or Harold, whatever I called him. So it was part of an attack upon a very, very conservative society.
Tony Benn was the Postmaster General, and I don't think we thought of him as Tony Benn then. I think we thought of him as Anthony Wedgwood Benn, and he'd been Lord Stansgate just about 5 minutes before that, you know. So he made a pretty severe social manoeuvre in the 60s. Whether it was in order to be swinging on it, I'm not quite sure, but he swung into the Labour Party from the higher reaches of the aristocracy and started to hound the hell out of us, you know.
The government may pronounce soon on the future of radio in Britain. Mr. Wedgwood Benn, the Postmaster General, has already pronounced on the pirates.
They're stealing the copyright and paying no money for it. They're playing records that musicians have recorded and giving them no money for it. They're endangering the ship-to-shore radio, and there's a real risk that distress at sea might not be reported because of the inadequate fumbling handling of equipment. The pirates are a menace, and I don't believe at all that the public wouldn't support action to enforce the law in the interests of all these people whom I've mentioned, quite aside from interference in other countries.
Life aboard the ocean and radio waves certainly has its attractions despite Postmaster Generals. It was a Postmaster General, Mr. Reginald Bevins, under the last Conservative government, who made the prediction that if the government didn't act against pot pirates, the coasts of Britain would soon be ringed by an armada of pot pirate ships. Well, it looks as if the pot pirates will be left alone and are making money.
Guys and gals, little ones are getting busy.
Feeling fine. There's something special on my mind. Last night I met a new girl in the neighborhood. Whoa, yeah. Something tells me I'm into something good.
My great fear was that Ronan was going to get into politics, which was inevitable, every part of his whole idea, and we were going to make some political statement or attack or defend, or whatever it is. And Ronan had this enchanting belief that one could deal with anybody.
And I can plainly remember these Anglo-Irish dinners that Ronan used to get up. And Harold Wilson used to be the guest of honor, and we used to have them here in the Carlton Tower. And I remember, and we used to send him messages from Bobby Kennedy. We used to get these broadcasts, we used to get these telephone links with Senator Robert Kennedy, giving us messages to the youth of Britain. And then Ronan used to take the tapes and take them along to number 10 and give them to Mr. Wilson, you know, a message from the youth of Britain, you know. And I think Harold Wilson got pretty keen on the whole idea of the youth of Britain.
Ronan was very good at getting over this sort of, this mystical idea of Radio Caroline, you know, as like the destiny of Great Britain was involved in Radio Caroline, and that it had this mission to fulfill. And he used to refer to Caroline as the lady. And when journalists used to go out there, and they'd notice that suddenly around the Caroline ship, around the Mi Amigo, that the seas would suddenly be calm, you know. And I mean, reality was, because Caroline was anchored over a sandbank, purposely, for a calmer anchorage. But Ronan would be there and he'd say, oh, because that's the calming influence of the lady there, you see. And Ronan was very much into the idea, I mean, 1967, which for me was the heyday of Caroline, was the summer of love. And Ronan got well into the idea of that we were beaming out love.
There was an incredible battle between, you know, the business accountancy world and the freedom-loving, you know, let's enjoy it. And the fact that we're enjoying it, the ship will be enjoying it, the audience will enjoy it. You know, the whole thing will go through to the audience.
Unfortunately, I must say this, the other side of the 60s, which was the anti-Vietnam War movement, the challenge to established idea, were never reflected on commercial radio or pirate radio. They just continued to pump out the music, and in a way, the establishment came to like the pirates because they offered what I think the establishment realized they had to concede, unlimited pop culture and sexual liberation as a way of diverting and defusing the pressure for social change.
Trying to make you see how it's got to be. Yes, it's all right, all or nothing. Yeah, yeah.
we got this building, it was fun. Because we'd got it, and it was such a wonderful, ridiculous building, you know, and it was so absolutely marvellously unnecessary to have a building of this size, you know, because, I mean, when Radio London came along, they had one room which you could have fitted 10 of in this, just the boardroom, you know. The attempts to try and get some sort of control over the thing, of a logical kind, did not succeed. Because you couldn't really have a logical conversation with Ronan of that kind. You couldn't sit down with Ronan and say, look, A, B, C, D, E, you know, like those sort of chaps like to do. They used to try it every week. They used to sit here at this table or whatever, and they used to say to Ronan, listen, let's get a bit of logic in there. But you couldn't. The Blarney, the whole thing of Ronan was too intense, you know. He'd say, well, you know, and he'd make you feel, including whole groups of people like that they didn't really understand something that was going on, some mystical thing that was going on which was beyond their comprehension. But what they'd figured was that we were losing money, you know, like a sieve, and they were right. So one day there just wasn't any. And so Phil Solomons was the contender, put in 50 grand, and he knew how to recoup it, you know.
I had a record company, music publishing companies. We ran an artist agency. The money that I put in went in with the proviso that I became joint managing director of the company. I remember Ronan was a dreamer. He had wonderful ideas, but I knew straight away he was never a businessman. And my real concern was if I was going to put my hard-earned money into it, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to go down the drain. I wanted to protect it.
When Phil Solomons finally took over and gutted the thing, I was very quickly removed. I was one of the first to go in the night of the Long Knives. And after that, all we played was The Bachelors, you know.
I wonder why you keep me waiting. Charmaine, my Charmaine, my Charmaine, my Charmaine. I wonder when...
They didn't like a lot of the records that we made, but they still went into the charts. The Bachelors had 17 hits in a row. They were very middle of the road. They're very, very strong artists. They do a lovely performance. To be very honest with you, I wouldn't have gone into it unless I had control of the playlist in order to play my own record.
He did restore order, I think, to an extent. But for all the reasons of the peculiarity of the thing, formally and informally, it was never going to be an ordered situation. I think Ronan wanted an ordered situation. I mean, and probably that would have made it rather dull radio. It was never dull.
I got a letter yesterday, and I opened it up, and I read this letter, and it was from an old lady, a very old lady, and she was on about the Marine Defences Bill, you see. She said, "My dear young man," she said, "would you believe it must be at least 49 years since I committed an offense with a Marine?" Here they are, the happiest criminals in town.
By that time, we were very much an international station, and we had a pan-European identity. And the part of the law that affected us, as we saw it, was the part that was going to make it illegal for British advertisers. I mean, the part that was effective was going to make it illegal for British advertisers to use Caroline. So we figured that it would be tough to continue. But as you know, we continued and survived.